Ladies and gentlemen, the Kids in the Room podcast. Kids in the Room podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Brought to you by Move Faces TV.
Woo! All right. Hey guys, welcome to the Kids in the Room podcast. Today we got Seth Erickson on the show. Seth, what's going on, buddy?
Many good things. One of which is that I've got a book coming out October 15th called How to Hack Humans, Storytelling for Startups. And I'm pretty excited about it. I think even if you're not a startup, you run a small business, you're an entrepreneur, there's a lot of great information that will help you kind of take action to get your messaging kind of put together and connect with your audience on a deeper level.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, could you how does the book kind of work? Like, how are we hacking the human mind? Like, how's this going?
Yeah. So the premise of the book, I use an analogy that's that the human brain is very similar to a computer. So if you think about it, we've got short-term and long-term memory, right? That's like your RAM and a hard drive. You've got a conscious and a subconscious, right? And that's your, kind of like your Windows and your DOS, or if you're a Mac user, it's OS X and Unix. We have firewalls, and that firewall is what we would know as bias, right? So we've got all these pieces, and we're essentially, kind of running an operating system in our head. And so then the question becomes, well, how do you hack that operating system? And essentially, what neuroscience is kind of showing us and pointing to is that it's storytelling. And the reason being is because stories basically are like apps that run on our operating system. So there has to be a way to write to these applications, to be able to update them, to be able to modify them, delete them, and storytelling is the method.
Yeah, right. So basically, you feel that storytelling is the method to kind of like, have it, is it kind of like you're saying it's almost like the software on the brain? Or how are you?
I'm saying
it's
like understanding a programming language, right? Like if you understand a language, then you can write an app, right? So you need to be able to be an effective storyteller to, create that application or rewrite it or update it or modify it or however you want to say it.
So basically, what you're saying is that storytelling is the actual code. So if I'm doing PHP or JavaScript or something else like that, if I'm doing some type of code, you're saying that is how do you say it? You're saying that is the actual coding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of when you're programming the brain through stories. So storytelling is coding.
Yes, because story is basically a pattern. It's a pattern that the brain recognizes and kind of locks onto. And then what you're doing is you're transmitting data through that story, right? Like, so for instance, we go back in time a million years. We were telling stories before we were painting on the inside of cave walls, before we had the alphabet, before we had, printed word. We had stories, and the reason we used stories was to disseminate information. Eat this red berry, not that one. Do this in the winter. Do this in the fall. Do this in the summer. Hunt here, not there. Right. All that information was passed through a storytelling method. How do you live your life and not be a complete asshole? Right. Like, we'd have tales and fables about morality that were teaching people through this same exact method. So there's always data being passed if you're doing the storytelling effectively anyway. So.
Right. Yeah, totally data being passed. So you think that in order to properly let a story be told and to live on and to be, acknowledged, you have to, you kind of have to, in order to have some type of message or whatever program you want to have passed on, you need to tell it in some form of a story.
Yeah. And I know that you talked to one of your previous guests, and you guys kind of covered on this subject a little bit. One of the things that a story needs to actually move from short-term to long-term memory is an emotion. It can be a positive, it can be a negative emotion. It really doesn't matter. That actually is what pushes it into the long-term memory. That's what actually helps it live on. But there are other kinds of stories. So this brings up an interesting point. In the book, made to stick. The Heath brothers wrote it. They talk about how there is basically ancient wisdom that was given thousands of years ago that we still repeat today. There's the phrase, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Never been a marketing campaign for that, right? Like people just hear it. And that has been repeated over and over and over and over and over again throughout multiple cultures, right? It's not just, people in America who have this saying. That actually came from Aesop's fables. So, completely different culture. Somehow we still know it today. And so that is the power, or one of the powers of storytelling.
Right. I mean, is storytelling almost like, like, could music almost be some sense of storytelling, right? I mean,
Yes. Yeah. Lots of songs tell stories. I mean, what's this, the Journey, Journey has the song "Don't Stop Believing,"
yeah, of
right?
course.
I think, and that is a story. It talks about, a small town boy, a small town girl, right? He's telling a story in the music, and I can see your head bobbing. You're like, I hear it now. I'm hearing it, right? So that brings up another interesting topic around, things being like computers and whatnot. So I know your guest talked about like that up to, or your previous guest talked about up to 7 different parts of the brain light up
Hmm.
when you hear a story. So that basically means that story, it becomes redundant through those different parts of the brain, and it becomes almost like a RAID server. That's why you get the effect of, oh, I heard that song, now I'm bopping along to it, right? Like, I smelled this thing. Now, oh, that reminds me of, my grandmother's cooking or whatever. Um, you know, one thing that people always say is, you say something to them and they're like, oh, that reminds me of a story, right? Because they're all those pieces are starting to get connected because of how the brain is being engaged. And like you said, it just kind of acts like a RAID server. It's like all that information is kind of lighting up all over the place as opposed to just going in one place. Um, which is like, the uh, facts and figures, right? You hear it, you comprehend it, and that's it. And none of the rest of the brain is engaged, so it doesn't hold on to that. It just kind of wipes it out of its short-term memory, and that's why people can sit there and go through 100-page, PowerPoint presentation, walk out after an hour and go, I don't remember one fucking thing that guy said, and it's because they're not engaged. They're not into the story, and there's no story around those numbers, so those numbers have no life to them. So
Yeah, man, that's true. I mean, when you hear something that doesn't resonate with you, you kind of get bored. But it's like, I think what you're saying is, that I can also agree with is that when you do hear a unique story or something that intrigued you as a story, it's easy to remember. Yeah, for sure. Just like
yeah,
songs. Yeah.
yes, yeah. Well, that's the thing is like, I love storytelling. I think it's incredibly powerful, but you tell the right story, or you tell a good story to the wrong person, it's just going to bounce off of them, right? Like, let's say, I love baseball and you love soccer,
I
right?
do.
I start telling you about, this other sport that I'm interested in, and you're not interested in that sport. You're going to be like, well, that's cool. Um, what's a double? Like I don't care about that. And then you're trying to tell me about a hat trick that happened, and I'm like, what's a hat trick? Like, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't connect, but it could be a great story, right? Like it. Um, so I often say that, like, there's no magic bullet, right? But if you understand your audience, you understand who you're talking to, then you can resonate that with them at a deeper level. You can position yourself to stand out with that audience, because a lot of people don't use storytelling. They just give you information about their product or services. Um, we see this a lot in startup land where everybody gets super hyped about the technology, but the technology doesn't actually explain how you're going to solve the customer's problem, right? And um, if you can't explain that, and you're only talking about what it enables the solution, but not actually what that solution looks like, and then tell a story where the customer can see themselves in that story, using that product, getting that outcome, then yeah, you're just going to be dead in the water.
Yeah, I mean, but also is there, I mean, there's also some type of sense of a bad story, right? You know,
Hmm.
people can tell stories, but what makes one good? What makes one bad?
Well, there's so many ways to make a bad story. You know, Hollywood, I think, has proven that out pretty good with a lot of movies that have come out and nobody's gone to see them, or people got really upset about them. Um, the most common pattern that we've seen from an anthropological standpoint is the hero's journey. It is a repeating pattern. It doesn't matter if you lived lived in China, uh, or Russia or Europe or um, or Native American. The hero's journey is the one thing that connects all those across time, across cultures. So starting there, right, seems like a good place to place your bets if you want to have something that people will actually understand. And I think the reason for that is that we all go through the hero's journey in our own life, right? Like one day you're fucking storming the castle, you're winning, and the next day you're fucking locked up in the dungeon. And you're like, what the hell's going on here? What happened? Um, and so what the hero's journey does is kind of shows the ups and downs of life, right? And hopefully through that process, you are learning, you're gaining new skills, gaining new insights, right? And then you're taking that, you're basically taking that fire, back to the people and saying, okay, here's what I learned from this experience. So, um, so starting with the hero's journey, being able to show that you understand what the problem is, that you get what people are feeling, you understand the villain that they're dealing with in their life, you understand what the villain is doing to the hero. You can describe that at depth so that they are essentially knowing that what you're talking about, right? That's where a lot of companies kind of miss the boat. Like they just, again, like I said, I'm picking on startups, but after you work with over 100 of them, you kind of see a repeating pattern. So, uh, uh, and it's not a good story, unfortunately. So, uh, so, so being able to define those things, not only do that, but also position yourself as the mentor in the story, right? Like you need to be able to say, I'm your Obi-Wan. Let me take you to the promised land. Let me solve this problem for you, right? Not enough companies do that. They actually try to set themselves up as the hero of the story because they're like, we got this amazing technology, we got all this cool stuff. You should buy our product, and it's like that doesn't going back to what we were saying before, it doesn't explain why I should give two fucks about what you're doing. Um, so so those are just some components that you can use from the hero's journey. Also using things like future pacing. This is what your life could look like if you use my product, right? Not spending a bunch of time talking about the features, but talking about what life looks like on the other side. You also need to spend at least a little bit of time talking about well, what happens if things stay the same, right? You just keep letting the villain beat you up and like is that what you want? Like, and it's not, I'm not saying to use that in a manipulative way. I'm just saying that like you kind of they call it in script writing, they call it raising the stakes, right? Like so you kind of have to raise the stakes a little bit, and the reason that you do that is because you need emotion for people to take action. If there's no emotion, there's no action. So um so yeah, the hero's journey uh is a good place to start. But stories can be told really in a lot of different formats. I mean, problem and solution is another one that a lot of people use. That is, do you have a headache? Yes, I have a headache. Oh, great, I have aspirin. Here you go. You know, that's going to solve that headache for you. That's a simplistic story, and it's effective, especially when there's a felt need or an immediate need. But when the need is not necessarily felt or immediate, then that has way less effectiveness. So.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. So what would be like a story that you could resonate, that you feel that tells a story example well? Like, yeah.
Well, since I'm a a big nerd,
Let's do it.
I like Star Wars.
Who doesn't?
The yeah. Well, I don't know. Like it's anyway, go off on another tangent.
They don't count.
So yeah, so the original, 4, 5, 6, right? Like George Lucas worked with Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell basically wrote the book on the hero's journey. His work built on what these other anthropologists and other people had started to kind of go, hey man, I'm seeing this story over here in this culture. I'm seeing this story here in this culture, and you know what? It's following the same thing. So Joseph Campbell is kind of he branded the idea, I guess, of the hero's journey. Wrote an amazing book on it. Goes into deep into mythology. Well, he worked. George Lucas read his book. He went to Joseph Campbell and said, "Can you help me with the script?" And Joseph Campbell's like, "Yeah, okay. Here's some pointers. Follow the hero's journey, right?" So um, that's why the trilogy is set up the way it is. It's like beginning, middle, end, right? The hero has the call to adventure. They reject the call. Yada yada yada. I don't want to go through all 15 steps, but if you look at Star Wars, it follows that exact pattern. There's a dip in the middle with Empire Strikes Back. He's basically, finds out his father is, an asshole, and cuts off his hand, tries to kill him, and he escapes to live another day, right? Like that is the dip in the story.
Right.
And, and then, in Return of the Jedi, the hero comes back and he's learned, he's perfected his training. He's become what he ultimately was striving for. But that process is very long, but the whole entire hero's journey goes from, Star Wars to Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. That is a perfect, it is a pitch perfect example of the hero's journey. One of the other things that I always like to point out is that, the reason a story like Star Wars resonates with people is because there are a lot of things built into the story that are part of the human experience, right? Loss of family members, right? Having a dad who's an asshole, feeling lost in the world, not knowing what to do. A mentor comes in and says, "Hey, let me help you out, right? Like, let me help you get further down the path faster." Having a crush on your sister. These are all very normal things that everybody deals with.
Wait, what? What? Having a crush on your sister? I don't know if that's normal, man. I don't know. Are we in Kansas? I don't know. That's weird.
So in these stories, right, there are these very real human experiences that we can resonate with, regardless of the fact that they're flying around on spaceships, right? And we've got like ninja wizards and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. There are these human experiences are baked into that story, and that's what that's what makes a story like Star Wars resonate with generations of people, not just men. Women resonate with with the characters in that story as well, because they're all very human. They're all flawed. They're all trying to get better, failing sometimes. Trying to figure out what the next step is, right? Winning and losing throughout the whole thing, and that's what that's what a good story does. Like it works on all levels if it's done right. And yeah, but like I said, it's not a magic bullet, like, so
or silver one. But I mean, so Seth, now we've kind of opened up a little bit, the art of the storytelling, things like that. But
Mhm.
I think when I'm thinking about that is, it's like, what about the point of like, when people watch just senseless entertainment? Like, what gets them in there? Where's the storytelling in that?
Well, yeah, I mean, so one of the things that happens when we watch a story is we create a simulation in our heads, and that simulation starts running. We put ourselves in that simulation. We ask the question, what would I do in that situation? Right. And so there's a lot of different psychological hooks that can be used in storytelling. I focus more on the marketing and branding side of that. But people they'll sit down and they'll watch a story and they'll just basically go into simulation mode, and then they'll lose 2 hours, right? They're just gone, because they've been transported into that story. And so, you know, lots of people like to do that, right? Like it's kind of a way for them to move away from, the stresses of the day or the problems that they're facing or whatever. It's, I mean, we call it escapism, right? Like, and I think that's it's good. It lets the brain kind of go into a different mode. But I wouldn't subscribe to doing that like all day every day, because you'd never get anything done. You'd just be, I mean, it's like I'm sure people listening have been like, hey, I'm gonna binge watch this show on Netflix or whatever, right? And then the whole weekend goes by, and you look back Sunday night and you're like, I didn't do a damn thing, man. Like that's. But again, that's how powerful good storytelling can be. But sometimes people take the most mediocre story or mediocre story and listen to that and still fall into that same trap. So but that I think your question really leans more to the psychology of the individual versus storytelling itself. So I'm not necessarily qualified to answer that. Like when I was doing the research for the book, there's a lot of psychology stuff coming up, and I was like, oh crap, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. I want to try to keep this book focused because we can go all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, because there's people out there. There's people out there who have, there's people that watch like, there's podcasts where it's just like, people are just joking around and bullshitting around, if you will, right? And
Mm-hmm.
people watch this stuff. People watch this stuff. They do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of senseless entertainment where people really don't care about a hero and things like that. So it's like, what compels people to watch random, you know, just goofing around or just silliness, right? It's people just want to laugh. People just want to be entertained at some point. So
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm digging at is like, do you always need a hero? Or does a story always have to be captivating for people to follow? Or is it just like people just go just to, listen to people or watch people, act silly or just be entertained in general?
Yeah. Again, I think it depends on the individual, but
Right.
um, we as a human species are very self-interested, right? And like that's a good thing. It keeps humanity moving forward. um, and so we are essentially all heroes in our own story. And so again, you could take that, right, and you can go, well, this is a dumb podcast where people are just talking. Well, I as a listener can sit there, listen in on that conversation, create that simulation in my brain, and go, huh, what would I do in that situation if that thing was happening to me? Right. And you can sit there and listen to that and be engaged by that. Um, you know, the quality of the story, it's like food, right? Like some people will just eat whatever, right? And some people are like, I only eat the best, right? Like I only eat, organic, cage free, farm raised, and so it depends on a person's taste as well. So does that
Yeah, that
answer the
answers. I
question?
think that kind of answers it. It answers the best way it is. It's more like basically what you're just saying is just, you believe it's like more like a preference of how you want to
Yeah.
be entertained.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want a story, but sometimes you don't need something. Sometimes you just need like basic entertainment. And that might be
Yeah.
depending on who that individual is.
Yeah. I mean, like think about it like going and hearing a talk, right? Like you're going to listen to an individual, and some people will tell stories, but that's a very different format than going and sitting and watching a movie where it's like, oh, here's the hero, right? This is Luke Skywalker, and we're going to follow this person's journey, right? A lot of times speakers will set themselves up as the hero of the story, right? Because that's what makes sense. And then you're listening to a I wanted to say Audible because I freaking love Audible. An an audio version of an audio version of a story, or a spoken word, I guess, version of a story. But yeah, I mean, it can be done a lot of different ways, and like you said before, music is another one, books is another one, right? So it really doesn't matter as long as it's following a certain type of pattern, right? Like if you get a book that's just a ton of numbers, right? Like I'm sure we've all had them in in college where it's just like, you get a math book, there's no story in there, right? And you're just like, crap, I got to figure out this trigonometry. This fucking sucks. Like, you know, um, so depending on your personality, right? Like you might be somebody that's like, no, I can see a story in this, right? Whereas I'd be like, dude, no, no, not at all. No, like it doesn't make sense. Um, I sucked at trig. I sucked at calculus. True confessions right here, right now. So,
Yeah, I mean, do you think you sucked at it because your teacher wasn't able to tell it in a story that resonated with you? What do you think it
I
was?
think I think it would have definitely helped improve my comprehension, right? Like, we've all had those teachers in school, whether it was grade school or high school or college, um, where you were like, I love this subject, or I didn't think I loved this subject, but now I do because of the way that that teacher engaged me. And quite often, at least for me, it was the teachers who told tons of stories, and then they would marry those stories with whatever the information was that I needed to learn, right? And so it's like, um, it's kind of like when when you know want to feed your pets their medicine, right? You kind of you get a pill and wrap it up in a ball of meat or something, and give it to them, and they get that information through that delivery system.
No, you're totally right. I mean, when I go back and I think about, even back in high school, it's like, certain, teachers got me interested in certain specific classes and different type of disciplines. And even in college too, as well, same thing, if we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
a CS class or it's in JavaScript, it's like, it depends on the teacher, man. Certain teachers just
Mm-hmm.
made me, I literally switched professors because of that. I was like, man, this is like, I'm not getting it. The storytelling here is just boring, and it's just like it just was shit. It was horrible. It wasn't good. Yeah. So at
Yeah.
least that's the way I felt. It didn't captivate me. It didn't get me synced in. I didn't really get it. And also one big thing that I always chime on, and when I go back and I'm, reflect on the past, I was like, why wasn't I interested in a certain subject earlier? And if I would have been, where would I have been at, point now? And I've realized that some of the biggest things that I felt was that I really didn't understand the importance of it. And
Mm-hmm.
it was not the reason that someone didn't tell me the importance of it. It was how it was told. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Mm-hmm.
storytelling of how it was told just didn't resonate with me. It was more of a, do this or you're going to do this or you're going to be this or you're not going to do this. And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't fucking mean anything to me. Like I'm not afraid of that. Right. But like, if you
Yeah.
tell somebody, hey, if you ever want to do this, and you'll need to do this, and this is how you do it. And it's actually fun. And if you poke on if you tell a story on people's interest, I feel that captivates and gets people interested, right? Because now
Mm-hmm.
it's something that relates to them instead of something that doesn't. And that might be hard to scale, especially when you have a room full of students. Everybody has their own different personalities. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could see that being, problemsome, but some way I feel like that kind of needs to be done where you're thought about the art of storytelling. So I wonder if you've ever thought about teaching this to teachers. And, startups need it with teachers and shit too, right? Shows
No,
them
I've
the
never
future.
really. Yeah, I've never never really thought about telling it to teachers. I mean, I see storytelling as something that kind of widens the net. Even if you have different personalities, it'll catch more people, right? Because, like I said, it's just however you want to say it. Like however we evolved, however we were designed, whatever. That is it is a part of how our brain works, right? And it's the most effective way to get information into that brain. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that us as a company, we focus on startups because that's an area we understand. But anybody can use this. And one of the points that I always try to make is that like everybody tells stories, right? Like we all do. We just some of us are just better at it than others. And and my whole point is to kind of educate people and say, learn about this, right? Because when you learn about it, you can have a bigger impact. You can have more effect. You can connect with people on a deeper level. You can be remembered longer. Um, and I know your other guest, talked about like the memory component and whatnot, but I think that it's like breathing, right? Like we all breathe, and we really don't think about it. And then when they started, science came along and started studying breathing, it was like, well, why can this athlete run longer, right? Or why do they seem to have more strength, right? It's like, oh, well, part of it has to do with breathing, right? Why can this crazy guy Wim Hof like sit in 0 degree temperatures and keep his body temperature, steady? Well, it's because breathing, right? So we're just now in the last couple of decades starting to go, oh crap, all this stuff that like we could kind of see that storytelling was effective and we knew that people liked it. We didn't really know what was actually going on inside the brain, and now we do. And so to kind of tie it all together,
Tie it up. Let's do it.
yeah, the point is that if you become that effective, if you become better at something you do naturally, then you will be able to communicate better with humans, and you will be able to resonate at a, you know, with them at a deeper level. So,
Hmm. Like, what do you mean? Like, for example, something you do naturally. Yeah.
yeah, well, like, you know, like I said, we'll all tell stories, right? Like, you have a spouse, a significant other, whatever. They come home and they're like, "What'd you do today? What do? You tell a story, right? But is it a good story? Yeah, maybe. Like I said, some people are gifted at storytelling just naturally, and some people aren't. And so you may be like, well, I went to work and I sat at work and I worked on this spreadsheet, and right, that is a story technically, but it's a really fucking boring story. Whereas you know if if you are better at telling stories and you understand the mechanics of story, then you can start to craft your story in a way that is really engaging, even if it is you just went to work and worked on spreadsheets, right? Like, you know you can say, I did this thing and then this thing happened, and you can add excitement and emotion and, turn something that is very average or benign into something much more exciting just on the way that you tell that story.
Right. Totally. No, I agree with you 100%. So how did you get all into this? I want to dig into that. Like, how did you start this, Seth? Like, what happened? What ticked on?
Um,
Startups.
well, that is that's an easy one. I was running a web design agency in 2015. I was very dissatisfied, even though we were making a crap ton of money. I had 22 employees. We'd, just won a Webby Award a year before. And so from the outside, it seemed like everything was really great. But for me internally, I was dissatisfied. And the reason I was dissatisfied is because I got into business to help people. And I thought, I went to design school and I thought, design changes the world. It makes everything better. But what I found was that, we would build a new website for a client, and that client would love the website. They'd pay us, no problem, super happy. And then I would say, well, did your sales go up? No. Okay. We're not moving the needle here. Like we were designing pretty things that our customers loved, but we weren't actually helping them in their grow their business or move their business forward. So a friend of mine said, dude, like you're a storyteller, right? Like, so sorry, I kind of jumped ahead. I was kind of on this soul searching thing, trying to figure that out. And a friend of mine goes, you're a storyteller. And I was like, well, great, but how do you make money as a storyteller? Like, I don't, like, like, um, you know, and so he gave me this book called Story Wars by Jonas Sachs. I read that book. It's totally captivated me. He's also an agency owner, and I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I basically started reading every book I could get my hands on storytelling. So I read over 50 books in the first year. Well, I had them read to me. Technically, I'm a big Audible
Audio
guy.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had them read to me at like
Nothing wrong
two
with
and a
that.
half and 3x speed,
Nothing
like,
wrong with that.
um,
Yeah.
and through that, some of the books started talking about neuroscience, and because they were talking about neuroscience, I was like, wait, there's some like actual data behind this and
Right. So,
science behind this. So I started reading articles on storytelling and neuroscience, and um, and I read several hundred of those over the next couple of years. They suck. They're really boring and dry, but there's really important information. And so I started kind of like trying to tie those pieces together and going, you know, okay, this isn't just some, here's my theory, or here's here's what my experience says. It's like, no, science is like, nope, this is legit stuff. Like, this is, here's what's happening in the brain when people hear stories. And there's some weird like sci-fi stuff. Like they did a study where they hooked up a storyteller's brain, and they hooked up like an audience of like, I don't know, it was like 500 people or something like that um, to these machines, and they followed the brain waves, and what they found was over the course of the story, every member of the audience started to sync up with the storyteller's brain waves. So now they're all in sync together at like this brainwave level, which we didn't even know was possible. um, and then from there they're going, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means they're all engaged. They've actually all fallen into that simulation. You fell into the simulation, like, I don't know however long ago it was when I said, what is your, do you remember having teachers that were better or worse? And you start going into the memory, right? And you're going, oh, I remember this teacher. I remember that teacher.
Right. It was a story that
Yeah.
resonated with me. Yeah.
Yeah. So you fell into the simulation, and then for a period of time through that conversation, we were actually synced up. Can't see it, but you could look at it on a brain scan and see that what I'm saying is true. So
what you're saying is, Seth, is that because basically you're calling simulation something that resonates. So something that resonates with me is a simulation that we both synced on.
Yeah,
we
you
found a
create
pattern
a
of
simulation.
commonality.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you and I have never met before, right? So how does that happen? Well, it's how the brain is works, right? Like, so
or we could have met up prior and we could be bullshitting everyone, but
yeah. Well, I mean, that would be fun too. But so then, you start looking at that stuff, and science is like, well, that's really interesting. And then they start digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're finding out more stuff. And there's still crap that we're going to find out, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, right? Because they're going to start asking different questions about, well, what does that mean? And how does that work? And why is that significant? So, yeah, it's, really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty compelling. I mean, it's something I've always thought about in general, where how I like to think of it is like how humans, how we kind of design machines in our own image in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
We have computers, and then we have cookies, which is temporary memory, right, on the browser
Mm-hmm.
itself. Then we have the actual hard drive, which is the long-term memory. Then we have the find and search. So when something's compelling, we can actually go locate that data that we might have not actually remembered, but we don't keep it in our temporary, right? There's a limit to the temporary memory or the cookies, right? So these are similar things of how we do things in the brain. And even when you go back to, in the body, the human body, and even when you go back to like even cars, cars have the engine, then it has the computer, and it has the wheels, all these things, and it needs gas, and then it has the exhaust. So it's like, somebody taking a poo. It's like you got to get rid of it. Like we design things. Yeah,
I would have gone with gas, but poop, works fine
gas,
too. I guess.
Poop. Maybe that's the oil change. I don't know. We got to change the filters out. I guess what I'm saying is like in general, it feels like we design our machines or things around us in our image, right? We have the same similar processes we like to put in there. Even when we're talking about AI and computers and stuff like that now, we're trying to make them think like us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the the multi-billion-dollar question, right? Like, is how do we make that leap to get AI, past machine learning into neural networks, and then into the final phases of this thing can actually think for itself and make these complex decision-making processes and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, that's, uh, I, that was my same conclusion when I came up with, the analogy of saying, okay, let's how do we talk about storytelling in an interesting way that's sort of different than how other people are talking about it. And it was like, well, let's use an analogy that makes sense, but also, um, and then map it back to explaining how you can hack humans, right? Like I'm trying to tie that story together
Mm-hmm.
in a way that will resonate with people, and make them go, yeah, I get that. Like instead of going, what the hell are you talking about, dude?
Yeah, I mean that happens. Yeah, what the fuck are you talking about? What are you talking about? What the heck are you talking about? Yeah, it kind of resonates. Are you thinking about getting the whole Elon thing synced up into your brain? Is that something that you're thinking about in the future?
Uh, no,
You wouldn't need
I,
storytelling anymore, would you? I mean, once that's in your brain, I don't know.
I don't, I think we're going to a place where we don't know exactly what the outcomes are going to be, right? And I'm not saying that that's it. I'm very neutral on it, right? Like it's like I'm always kind of a wait and see kind of person. So it's like, what happens when you start inserting things into the brain and modifying the way that the brain works. Like is it better? Is it more efficient? Does it make you not human anymore? Like what exactly is going to happen? Um, so that's where I kind of sit on the, I kind of sit on the fence on stuff like that. I don't know if you would need storytelling or not, you know, um, because now like I said, you're changing the way the operating system works potentially.
I
So,
mean, you're pretty much just feeding unlimited data into it where it can access it at any time. You're actually uploading, the internet to the brain.
hmm yeah. So I don't know what would happen. I would also need to research that more to even be able to talk on it cogently, unfortunately.
I know I agree with you, but something that's also weird is I wonder if things are meant to be for certain reasons. For example, our brain, we don't use majority of it, right? We use a small portion of that. So maybe it's turned off for a fucking reason, right? Maybe the brain is turned off for a reason because we can't handle it all, right? I mean, imagine if you just had a feed consistently in your brain where you can access anything, any language, anything you want to do.
Well, we don't use that much of our brain. Ideas it's a fallacy.
Let's do it.
Like I said, so with the brain scans, like we can see the whole brain lighting up, not just like a little portion of it, right? So if I'm correct in what I'm understanding you're saying, that we're only using part of it, it's like, well, the brain scans don't bear that out, right? Like that may have been something that somebody was like had a theory a long time ago, and that was before we could look at brain scans and go, nope, like we could see the whole whole damn thing lighting up like a Christmas tree. um, so so yeah, I mean, I think the bigger question is what happens when you try to jam too much information in there, right? Like we have, our brain goes through a process of cleaning out information because it needs the space, right? Like if you could remember everything you did, like let's say for the last month, right? Everything you said, every feeling you felt. If you could remember what the weather looked like, what you ate, when you sneezed, when you went, when you took a poop, um, your brain would basically be so overloaded, so jammed up that it wouldn't be able to function. So the brain has to go through and clear things out. So I guess the question then would be, well, um, how do you get the data in there to the point that it doesn't cause somebody's brain to basically fry, right? Like because you just stuck the internet in it. Um, is it like a Google search where you just go, okay, I need this little bit of information and then you can go find it immediately? Or is it like, no, we're putting it all in there. Like we can do that, right? Like I don't know how that storage works, but I do know that that we clear out stuff out of our um, our short-term memory so that we can function.
Right, like cookies in the browser. Yeah, totally get it.
Yeah.
But it's like, we're doing that, and right now we got phones. We got phones. We got social media addictions and things like that. We barely can
hmm
understand. We barely can take, having, all of our friend groups and people commenting and liking, all these emotions in social media. We barely can handle that. So imagine having a
Right.
neural link hooked up to your brain and you can access the internet at any time. And, who knows what else you can actually do. Are we built for that? It's just a weird thing to do. I mean, we're telling stories, but how many stories can we simultaneously take in the brain without going bonkers?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can hold a lot of stories, right? Like, so we know that much, right? Like, you can remember things back to like when you were a kid. You can remember, like all kinds of things. And some people are obviously better at memory or have more memory, seems like, than others. Um, so, um, so that, man, I just lost my thread. That's awesome.
It happens to the best of us, man. But yeah, I mean, like, I mean, you also touched on some other things. You also brought up, and it's a question I want to dig back in on. It's like you brought
Hmm.
up that that it's kind of an old way of thinking that we don't use the majority of the brain. We use actually all of it. It all lights up through brain scans and things like that. We can actually test these things now and see and
Hmm.
verify what we're actually utilizing. But at a certain point, how much of it, just because it's lighting up, does that mean we're actually utilizing all of it? Or, because like there's points where certain people, they get they have to, have surgeries and certain parts of the brain, get
Hmm.
taken out and they're still able to operate.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I was like 20 years ago, there was somebody who had like half their brain taken out. They were still able to function. Um, so part of, uh, at least as I understand it, because again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've read
Neither
a
am
lot
I.
on this.
Yeah.
Um, there, your brain does have the ability. You have what they call neuroplasticity. So you have the ability to remap um, certain things in your brain, right? That's like muscle memory is part of that, right? Like you can remember to do something without actually having to think about it. Um, so, but at the same time, yeah, like we know that like if you damage a certain part of the brain, was it the amygdala? You can't make decisions anymore because you don't have any emotions. That's actually something I talked about in the book. There's a neuroscientist who had a fascinating patient who, because he couldn't make decisions, he basically went to the store, would stand there and couldn't figure out which milk to buy because he didn't feel any way about any of them. He would just stand there for like 2 hours
Wow.
because he couldn't make a decision. Like so. So anyway, I kind of took that off in a different direction, but
No.
yeah, I mean, there's definitely been people. Yeah, like one person, like half their brain was taken out and they still were able to function. But it does, we do see things like personality changes, loss of memory, right? Like, it's not just because you can function doesn't necessarily mean you're going to still be the same person that you were before that happened.
Right. And I mean, there's drastic cases of those, but I'm saying
Hmm.
non-drastic cases of those where people are, operating just fine with portions of their brains taken out and it wasn't a thing. Just like we can get certain organs taken out of our body and, our personalities don't change. We pretty much are still the same person, but, there's some that we just don't 100% have to rely on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question, but like I said, I know that we have the ability to adapt because they can see that on the scans, like that your neurons will basically start to rewire, um, and that's how you learn new information, right? Like they have to kind of rewire and get set up a different way so that you can now understand a new thing. Like let's say you're taking up a sport or something like that. Well, a lot of the way your brain's wired before you start that sport, and then once you take on that sport, all that has to kind of change around. So we do we do adapt to a certain degree. I think it just depends on um, the amount of actual damage at the end of the day that determines what whether or not things change drastically or not at all. So.
No, 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 totally agree. I mean, yeah, to an extent, it's all about how drastic the damage is, right? With kind of
Hmm.
anything, if your leg gets torn off to a certain extent, it depends on how badly it was torn off, right, before it can be repaired. But some places are just not irreversible in general. But yeah, that's great. But you also you do these with these startups, and you help them, because I wanted to touch back on the journey that you mentioned earlier, how you got
Hmm.
into this. You started out, you started reading a bunch of books, and you kind of just said, hey, look, I'm interested in this storytelling thing now. How do we get here? Like what was that point where you actually said, I'm going to switch this over, start helping startups and make a business. I'm confident. I know this is going to work out for me. I'm stopping the whole agency thing, and I'm just doing this.
Um, so yeah, so there's a couple of different components there. Because we did web design, we worked with a lot of startups, right? Because like startups would come to us and they'd be like, "Oh, you helped my friend. He needed a website to feature his product or service or whatever," right? So, and we also worked with a venture capital group that brought us a bunch of customers. So we were doing a bunch of the startup stuff already. Um, then with the storytelling, like I said, once I got into the science side of it, I mean, I was already bought into it, but I was like, well, how does this work? Right? Like that's really what I wanted to know. Um, and once I, started pulling that together, I just started going back to my clients going, hey, let's try some stuff. Let's try the storytelling thing. Like I'm learning about it, and this is, several years ago now, but I'm learning about it, and I think it'll work, right? And they're like, okay, I had clients who basically trusted me, and so we started doing things like sending out email campaigns using very specific storytelling processes, or changing the content on their website. And the reason that I saw it, I I wanted to use it was, right, like design will make your website look great, right, or your product look great, and some products can be sold that way, right? Like you can look at a new Tesla and be like, yeah, I want to buy that, or a new car, or a Bentley, or whatever, right? But with the service, you have to explain what it is. So now we're into the communication side of things instead of the picture side of things, right? Um, so I saw storytelling as a better way to communicate, and so that's where I was like, well, let's start changing words. Let's start changing, anywhere where we're using words, which is like everywhere, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans, right? So we have to use words. We can't just, pantomime like, what we want them to understand. So that's how we started to do that. And then through that process, I was like, I was starting to look at things like marketing, and I saw some people were using storytelling in marketing, but I also saw a lot of people who were just shouting at everybody using marketing. And then I started getting more into the branding side of things, which I had a lot of experience with, but doing web design. But I was like, well, I need to understand that better, and that's where I started to go, oh, there's more focus on story on the branding side of things than there is on the marketing side of things. Um, Often in marketing, and I'm not saying that everybody who's in marketing does this, but I often see, psychological tactics, manipulation tactics, and things like that, that are just they're short term, right? Whereas understanding story, using it in your branding is thinking more strategically, and so that's kind of how we started to pivot into a branding and storytelling agency.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, when you bring that up, that it resonates definitely with me. I understand totally what you're saying in a lot of ways. I think when you think about design, this is something that, you know, I've been, building products for a bunch of cool companies for a couple of years, right? And it's like one thing that I learned when I'm dealing with other product owners, and I try to explain them this, and this is something that's not inherently built inside of them, or even, they understand. And I know we have, a lot of these internal rating systems on
Mm-hmm.
how well a product person is able to think with design thinking, visual design, interaction design, things like that, and soft skills, like self-awareness, proactivity, and drive, things like this. But once we have those, one thing I've noticed, that I felt a lot of designers, whether they were senior or head, that they didn't really understand the art of branding and the art
Mm-hmm.
of marketing, and how they can shape, that strategy of even raising capital and things like that. They didn't understand that. But then there's this big critique of someone who's saying, hey, look, this is how design thinking is. And it's like, do you even understand design thinking? Because like, I'm just being honest. It's like, how do you understand design thinking technically when you've never built or designed anything in the real world? Like, this was already started for you once you've gotten
Mm-hmm.
here. All you're doing is just bringing some wood and just maintaining the fire. So
Mm-hmm.
how can you rate something that you don't even see or technically don't even understand because you've never done it really? You only understand how to bring the wood and maintain the fire. This is a different type of level. And what I've noticed the biggest point is a lot of people don't understand the whole branding factor. They don't understand branding also attaches to the name. It's a part of the storytelling, and it's
Mm-hmm.
used. A startup with a startup with a name that doesn't resonate and doesn't tell a story, right? Just by the name, it automatically can turn off people. It has to have something has to resonate with the actual, consumer, right? Or it just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
stick. So that's a part of the storytelling. And then it's also the person. I mean, I've noticed like you have now these, CEOs where they're more, out there. They're more communicative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, communicative with like their audience. You got guys like Elon Musk, your Steve Jobs. Before it was like Bill Gates. They hid behind the corners. You didn't really see them. You just knew they did stuff, but you really didn't know them. They didn't really have to interact with the actual audience as they do now.
Mm-hmm.
Now people
Mm-hmm.
want a Steve Jobs. They want an Elon Musk. They don't want a guy sitting behind the corner. You don't know anything about them. He's Zuckerberg and stuff like that. They don't want that anymore. People want somebody that they can kind of touch, and they're buying in on that brand of that person.
Mm-hmm. So, man, you said so many things there. I'm like,
Sorry
oh,
about
I don't
that.
even know where to start.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No, it's great. So let's back up real quick because I use this analogy for branding, right? Like you go on the internet and you're like, what is branding? And then you get 1,000 different answers, right? Like everybody's like, oh, this is branding, this is branding, this is branding. So I use a simple analogy, and I think this will speak to what you're saying. I think of as a brand as a person, right? How they dress, that's their design. What do they say? That is their marketing, right? How do they act, or what is the experience with them? That's kind of the story, right? Like that's at the center of all this stuff. Um, and one of the things that like you're kind of touching on, which is that a lot of companies don't actually have brands. They have marketing, and there's no archetype to their brand. So they're all kind of the same, right? They all say the same thing, they act the same way, and there's no personality. And I think what you're picking up on is that idea of like, well, if we have a CEO that's in front of the company, like Steve Jobs or any of these other people, that person is a stand-in for the personality of that brand, right? And so they then become sort of the brand archetype, right? Like Steve Jobs was the rebel personified that Apple espouses to be. So I just wanted to kind of pull all those ideas together in a way that was simple, as opposed to going, oh, well, branding is really this and branding is really that. No, it's like, just think of it like a person. And, like I said, if you break it down into, like you have friends, right? Like some, or you've met a lot of different people, and you have some you have really good experiences with, some you have bad experiences with. And those experiences leave positive or negative emotions. And then you decide, I want to spend more time with that person. I don't want to spend time with this person. Brands do the same damn thing, right? Like you buy a product, it sucks. Now you're having a bad experience. Now you don't want to, keep interacting with that company. Or what's even worse is you call their customer support, it sucks even worse. And then you're like, I never want to deal with these people again. Well, now you've created a story in your mind about that brand, just like you have stories in your memory about your friends, right? And the experiences that you have with them. So that's why I use the analogy of a brand is like a person. You have these experiences with the brand, you have experiences with other people, and you determine how you feel about them, right? That's your brand affinity, if you will. And so but I think at the center of all that is story. Story is the caramely goodness at the center of your brand.
Yeah.
And whatever that story is, not only defines your brand, but it also defines your culture, right? Because people say, this is who we are, right? You're in that company, and that story is what defines how the company sees themselves, which then also defines the culture, which then defines the actions that are taken, which define the experiences, and so on and so forth. So I bring it all back to story, but I'm biased like that. So
No. I mean, it all does resonate to story to me. From anybody I think who really understands branding, it all does resonate and it all comes full circle to a story. But it's all a part of a story, right? They're just portions of a big overall holistic view of an actual story. You have to
yes.
have with branding, the marketing, the founder, all these things tell a story in general, right? And you have different representations of that, right? The color
Mm-hmm.
scheme, the name, the CEO, the personality of that CEO. These are all these attributes of an actual story, right? You need these things to
Mm-hmm.
tell a compelling story. These are
Mm-hmm.
tools or things that are ingredients to make it, right? But I'm saying, like, in
Yeah.
general, is like what I've noticed is that a lot of product builders, they don't really have this branding thing inside of them, and they kind of separate it, especially when you start talking about product design and managers, because they feel like the brand is already there, right? Especially
Mm-hmm.
when it's a bigger company, the brand is already there. All we're doing is just maintaining the fire. So we're just throwing the
Mm-hmm.
wood and making the fire bigger. That's it, or just keeping it going. That's
Yeah,
about it.
they're thinking about it like engineers, right? Like, um, with that engineering mindset, which is, well, I make stuff that works, right? I was asked to do this task. I did it. It works. What else do you want from me? Like, um, yeah, I've dealt with quite a few engineers, and it's like, um, we had a startup we were working with, and they created this game, and they were all really proud of it. And this engineer asked the question. He said, "But is it fun? Are people enjoying the game that we created?" I was like, "That is a very fucking good question," right? Like, because if you like from a product manager standpoint, it's like, well, it works. What's the problem here? It works. And it's like, no, the question is it fun? Are people enjoying the product that they're using?
Right.
Yes, it's executing all these things. You've put in all this effort into programming and design and all this other stuff, but the is it fun question goes a step beyond that, right? And is looking at, well, what is the experience for the user that's using the product, and not just saying, well, I built this thing, it works. What else do you want from me? It's like, well, you have to ask those deeper questions. So, um, and you talked about design thinking, and we've used that previously, and I think it's a phenomenal process. And I think that following a process like that, I think leads you to asking those deeper questions as well. So I'm a big fan of design thinking, but we don't use it very often anymore, only because we're not really creating products. We're working on the branding side of things. So
Right, but I feel like those automatically correlate with each other. They overlap. And it's like if you don't
yeah,
have that in consideration, it's like, you end up building something else without thinking about the brand in mind. I mean, it's just like, what's that storytelling when you're building out that brand?
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I would think of the product as, is it in service of the story that we're telling, right?
Yes. Yeah.
If it's not, then why the hell are we doing
You're
it?
you're off brand. I mean, I guess I'm
Yeah.
just saying is like, when it comes to thinking about different design decisions or, directions, it's not always thought about how that actually leverages brands, especially when you start talking about early stage startups. The
Hmm.
names don't sound like they don't resonate for what the actual product does.
Hmm.
The branding needs to be redone because the branding is not where it needs to be visually, and not just verbally in the story and everything else like that. All of it's just not where it needs to be in order to make it to what some of these founders, or I would say probably most of these founders, really wish to achieve. They all want to be billion-dollar companies, but you don't have a billion-dollar fucking brand. You don't have a
Hmm.
billion-dollar name. It's like just not going to really resonate with somebody. But sometimes that can happen without it. You could sell to another company or something in the
Yeah.
background.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of the founders and different people who build these companies are incredibly skilled at what they do, right? Which is engineering, or um, or, whatever it is. I mean, you can, not all startups are tech, but that's what we've worked with the most. But I mean, there's startups in farming, there's startups in the medical world, right? Like they may be doctors or farmers or whatever. So they're incredibly skilled at their skill, but very few people that go to start a business have a branding background, right? They didn't get those classes in college, right? They were going, okay, I need to learn, PHP, C++, JavaScript, right? Like, or this all this medical stuff. And, there may have been one class in there on marketing, right? um, and there were probably even less classes on storytelling, right? So, or branding. And so, yeah, like, I, that's why we exist, right? Like we're the ones who are like, no, let us help you communicate with your audience and tell them why the fuck they should care about your product, right? We do that using storytelling. Um, so, but again, like you said, all those decisions goes back to who's the person, right? If you think about your brand as a person, um, Steve always wears black, right? So we should always design black things, right? Like, Susie loves bright colors. Well, we should always be using bright colors, in our design, right? Like, I think those decisions can flow from sort of the inside out if you understand the brand, right? If you don't understand the brand, or you think you have a brand, but there's not really a brand there because there's no archetype for what your brand is. There's no understanding of the persona of your brand. Then yeah, you're going to make all kinds of random decisions, and like you're going to start. It's like having a friend who always dresses like a slob, and then he shows up in a tuxedo one day, and you're like, well, what the hell's going on with you, man? This isn't consistent. like, like, are you drunk? Like, you know what I mean? So those pieces, yeah, there needs to. So I guess how I'm reading your question or understanding your what you're talking about is talking about consistency, right? And in that holistic viewpoint. And if you don't know what your brand is, and you don't know what your story is, and you don't know what your brand identity is, then yeah, you're going to have a whole bunch of inconsistencies across the board.
Well,
One
you can
day
have
everybody's
them.
just,
You can have them. You can have an idea of what it is, right? Just like we said, storytelling. You can tell
mm-hmm.
a story, but if the story is crap, it doesn't resonate with
Yes,
people, then it's still bad, right? So what I'm
yes,
saying is there's a lot of companies that have bad storytelling in general. The branding is not on point. The name is not where it needs to be in order to get it to, resonate with people. All of this is a part of the actual story. It's a part of the ingredients to making a great story, a compelling story, right? The marketing is a
mm-hmm.
part of it. The branding is a part of it. Everything is the name, the founder now. These are all, I feel, almost imperative to making a great story. This is why you have guys
Mm-hmm.
like Elon Musk. He makes a great freaking epic story when you add the whole thing together, the branding and everything else like that.
Right,
The PayPal
right,
mafia, coming from South Africa and things like that. And mom was a model and father was abusive, and now he's this Iron Man. I mean, and he's building these cars that are autonomous, and he wants to take us to Mars. I mean, it's building this compelling story, right?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And it
yeah, it totally
matches.
is. Yeah,
Tesla it sounds like something he would do.
yeah,
Tesla, Nicholas Tesla. Yeah, I know. And it seems
yeah,
like he would resonate with that. Space, it seems
yeah.
like it would match with him.
Yeah, I mean, we fell prey to this in the beginning as well. Like, we had a completely different agency name when I started the business back in 2004, and now we're Storyfy Agency. And the reason we're Storyfy Agency is because we're not trying to be Spotify or Shopify. Storyfy is an actual word, and it means to tell or narrate in story. It's the Oxford definition. So we literally were like, we should name ourselves what we do, right? Like, and like I said, it sounds like, by saying, putting an IFY on the end of it, it sounds like we're trying to be like a startup, but it's like, no, we're not. We're actually using the word that defines what we do as a company in the name of our company. So it's as simple as that.
Right. But a lot of people don't understand that's a big part of branding,
Mm-hmm.
It's a big
Mm-hmm.
part of branding consistency, and telling that story. It's like, does that story sound consistent? So if the story doesn't sound consistent, it just touches people awkwardly, right?
Yeah, it's bad to touch people awkwardly.
Yeah.
You're like, there's got to be a better way to say that.
Right. But there's with the self-awareness, you just don't you don't know it sometimes. When you lack self-awareness, you don't know if it's awkward, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, that's why I think story is at the core of the whole thing, right? Like when you understand that story, you know who you are, you know what you're doing, then all decisions and actions can be consistent, from the inside out, right? And instead of just, freaking
Right. I mean, but that's also
like,
could be like why storytelling in general, like even when you're working for companies or you're applying for companies, you're doing presentations, certain people's stories might be more compelling than the other. And you can also, push a candidate over another because of a story that they told. Maybe it resonated with the other person more than the other, right? I mean, some people
Mhm.
have biases on how they want their story delivered, and if it doesn't sound like a story that resonates with them, like you mentioned something, I think it's a deeper question that we're digging into. Because like you mentioned
Mhm.
also earlier, previously said that, when something resonates, right, with someone, with the other party or the other individual, excuse me, their minds are in sync.
Mhm.
And when they're not, I mean, I think you called it simulation, right? But when they're not in
Yeah.
this simulation or it doesn't resonate with them, then, your story's not going to get past them and they're not excited about you. So if it
Yeah, it
doesn't,
just bounces off. Yeah.
right. So you can have internal biases because the story just doesn't freaking resonate. You could
Mhm.
be a great, Seth could be this great guy who can build these amazing things, but it's like if your story doesn't resonate with me, I don't like your story. I just don't like it. Doesn't
Yeah.
intrigue me. You're not
Yeah, I
hired.
mean, I think that is obviously startups have dealt with this forever, really, which is not really understanding their customer. I mean, I've had startups come to me and I'm like, okay, so tell me about your customer. Oh, um, here's this one page. We wrote everything down we know. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's it? That's all you know about your customer? And you're just assuming they're going to buy your product? Like, dude, you need to you need to do your customer research, and really understand. I mean, this is why people in the startup world we have this fun word called a pivot. Part of that is not understanding what your customers want, or thinking they wanted one thing and now they wanted another, or thinking one audience wanted one thing and finding out a completely different audience over here wanted that thing. And that's that comes back to lack of research. But if you do that research, you understand who your audience is, then it's going to be really easy to tell a story. I'm not going to go to a conference with a bunch of, Lord of the Rings fanatics and tell them a story about Star Trek. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
that's not going to work.
Right. Knowing your audience.
I mean, yeah. So, just to use a really nerdy analogy, but it's I'm just trying to paint it in as plain English as possible, right?
Right.
Like, um, that story, while it may be a damn good Star Trek story, you're talking to fantasy, people who love fantasy. They don't care about science fiction, so um, so it's not going to make sense. I mean, sure, there'll be some science fiction people that there's some crossover and whatnot, and you can get a few of those, but you're not going to get the larger audience that's like, tell us a story about Frodo. Like, so,
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think morally what I was also touching on earlier, as a couple of seconds ago, was morally it's like, how does that also resonate to, hiring? Like if we're hiring, different skill sets, if you're not telling a story that resonates with me in general, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, your story's bad. It may just be that it doesn't resonate with me and my mind doesn't sync with yours in that simulation, right? Like you kind of explained.
right.
And so therefore
So,
you're not fucking hired.
right. So
You can't control it.
so yeah, um, so that actually goes kind of down the path of vision, right? Like, what is the vision for your company? Where are you going, right? Like, vision is a story about a future state that you're trying to get to or achieve. Again, you know, a lot of the same principles apply, but what happens, when your vision is a good story, people start to go, right? They run that simulation. They start going, oh, here's where I could help. Here's where I could contribute to this thing, right? Like and one of the analogies I use around vision is building a strong vision is like building a house that other people can see themselves living in, right? Like, so yeah, when you go to hire somebody, you're like, here's what we're doing. Do you want to be on board with that? You're telling that story of where you're going. And some people are going to be like, raise their hand and be like, yep. And some people aren't. And depending on, the size and scope of your vision, you might get more or less people. One of the things that I always try to talk to people about is like, make sure your vision is not about yourself, right? Like when Elon Musk says, we're going to Mars, right? That's not about, I mean, it may be about Elon Musk, but it's also about the rest of humanity. Like we are going to Mars, not I'm going to Mars, right? And so I've met founders who, it's like, well, what's the vision for your company? Well, we want to make $2 million by next year. It's like, well, that's a goal, and it's not really about anybody else, you know. And like, I don't, I honestly don't care because it's, that's about you. It's not about us. So, yeah. So like with that type of stuff and using again storytelling, in your vision, it's it'll either resonate or it won't, and that'll just depend on the individual at the end of the day.
Yeah. So that's basically what I'm saying. It's like at certain points, a person really at a certain point or perspective can't really control certain things, because like you can't control sometimes if your story resonates with every single individual, because just like you said, like channels, there's always going to be somebody who wants to subscribe. There's going to be somebody who doesn't want to subscribe. The only thing you can really kind of control is, making sure that your story is the best that you feel that it can be, or that
Mm-hmm.
resonates with your audience or enough people. If it's just totally crap, then you probably need to go back and revamp it. But sometimes it may be hard to figure out why your storytelling is not that good. How do you really, when you go at your startups, how do you start identifying if the story is good or bad? Like, and how do you correlate that to the founders
Well, so
without
I
turning them
mean,
off?
yeah, well, so usually what happens in the process is there's a lot of education, right? Like, okay, and we also usually see the story being about the company, not about the customer. So you go through the education process. Here's why storytelling is powerful. Here's what science says, right? Like, there's a few steps in the process that we need to kind of get the customer up to speed on, and that's part of the reason why I wrote the book too, was like, let's get this out here now, so we don't have to have this conversation later. But I can. It's easy to spot a bad story because it's just like I said. It's usually um, more often than not, it's about the company, and your customer cares about themselves, and so it's like I use the analogy like you go to a party and you meet somebody for the first time, and all they do is talk about themselves for 20 minutes straight. Well, what are you going to do? You stand there and go, I love this. You're like, no, I got to go get something to eat, or I got to go hit the restroom, or you're going to find a way to excuse yourself from that conversation, because that conversation is very one-sided and it's all about that other person. Like, you're not having a back and forth. You're having, you're being talked at. Like, so, um, so usually what I see is they're like, oh, well, we invented this amazing technology. Here's, we have this incredible, team, blah, 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 blah. And that story is all about them, right? It's not about the customer, how you're going to solve the customer's problem. And so it's about positioning that customer as the mentor to help the hero in the journey. And so, but yeah, I mean, to your other point though, like using the hero's journey is going to get you a hell of a lot closer than um, using other methods, right? Of just like blasting ads at people, right? Or, or whatever. So, or coming up with catchy slogans. I mean, that crap worked, like 70 years ago, 80 years ago, but like people have kind of caught on to the games, right? And that's why I consider a lot of the marketing things to be tactical and short term. But yeah. I'll just I was getting on a little bit of a soapbox.
No,
I'll step
you were
off for a
going,
second.
man. You're going. So Seth, I mean, like now you've got you started with the business, you started pushing it up. How did you start convincing people, to, I know you said you work with some of these founders, your original clients.
Mhm.
So you just went back with them and you had this, you had this new proposition that you kind of wanted to present to them about the art of storytelling. Let's try these things out. Were you charging
Mhm.
people at that time? And then like, how did you, think about also charging people now? Cause now you're ready to make this into a whole new business. Yeah.
Yeah, so we actually basically started undercharging because it was almost like we were running a scientific test. Does this shit work? Was the question. Like I believed it worked, but then it was like we had to start applying it. Interestingly enough, when I started talking to people, they were actually more interested in having that conversation about storytelling than they were about, oh, we should design you a new website. Right? If I had that conversation, they were going to be like, okay, that's nice. But then when I came in and said, hey, let me tell you about storytelling, and I'd literally talk with people like 30 minutes and um, just give them all the points. I guess I would probably do it in a story fashion of why this stuff's important and why we should try it out. They were like, okay, yeah, we'll try that. And yeah, and we, like I said, it was like we charged very little in the beginning. It was almost like just cover our cost for doing this. And then, over time, we started getting some big wins, and, we can take those things and, put them in front of other customers. Here's what we were able to do. For instance, we brought in $4.3 million of potential new business for one of our customers during COVID through a cold email campaign using storytelling, right? That's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a little win.
Yeah. A little win there, I mean, yeah, I mean, so basically what you did is you ended up getting like once, you got a solid win. And then after
Hmm.
that, you felt you had some substantial room to actually make this a business,
Hmm.
and further it out. But how did you go about thinking like, well, okay, well now Seth, I've been helping out these startups. I mean, I just helped this one startup and somebody got a win, you know, how do I, go back and I'm thinking, hey, well, what the hell do I charge people? Because it was different when you were doing things as an agency, but now you had to recalculate yourself to thinking about storytelling, and measuring what storytelling's value is, and for you, and how you're going to charge people. Like that's not something the same as doing an agency of development, because it's a physical thing. You know exactly how to itemize that and how to price that properly.
Hmm.
But now you're just
Yeah.
storytelling.
So we yeah, like before in the agency model, it was hourly, right? Like, okay, it was this many hours to build a website, and it's going to take this many people, and you multiply that out, and you go, okay, here's our profit, blah blah blah. With the with the story with storytelling, so one of the first things we do is we sit down and we help facilitate a story. We do not tell people what their story is going to be. That's one of the things that I also want to be clear on, because people think, oh, you're going to come in and tell me how to tell a story, and I'm like, well, I'm going to teach you what the ingredients are for a story, but it's going to be your story at the end of the day. So we never have people push back on us and go, oh, I don't like that story. It's like, well, you gave us all the words, right? You gave us all the ingredients. We just whipped it up for you, you know. And it's easy to change things. It's like, oh, we thought we wanted walnuts in our cookies, but now we want pecans. Okay, we'll swap that out, put that in here, and we move on. But with that, we were like, this really needs to be value-based pricing, and so we just started raising the prices little by little, and it was a flat rate. Okay, we do this. Okay, we had 3 customers buy it at this price. Let's move it up a little bit. Do we get a fourth? Oh, that person bought it at that price. Well, can we keep going up? And again, so it wasn't super scientific in that sense. I wish I could say that I had a better model. I just thought, can I charge $500 for this? Yes. Okay. Can I charge 1,000? Can I charge 1,500? Can I charge 2,000? And I just kept, we just kept kind of raising the prices. Those aren't the prices that I charged. It's just an example in case anybody's like, well, how much does this guy cost?
Everybody
So
wants to know.
Yeah, so that is kind of how we did it. And so far, we've been able to charge, in the thousands, for going through that process. And then the next step is, okay, now you have your story. Well, how do we actually start applying this? Well, we start looking at your website, because your website is Grand Central Station. You run an ad, people want to know who you are, they're going to your website. People meet you in person, they're going to research you, they're going to go to your website. Well, so your website now basically acts as a salesperson that is, answering the questions for the client of, like, who are these guys, what do they do, and some salespeople, or websites show up like they're freaking, hungover, been out all night partying, got stains on their leisure suit, like, and they're doing a terrible job, communicating, what the value of, the product or services that they're selling. And people don't realize that, because they're not thinking about how are we communicating our value to our customer. So, so all that, you're all that, the copywriting, how you market, what you say, it all comes from that story, and defining what kind of brand archetype you are, right? Like, are you a rebel? Are you a muse? Are you a leader? Um, all that then has to be applied to your website and to your marketing material and to all these other things. So it's a bigger process, but the story is where we start.
But I'm saying, like, in general, it's like you help these companies get, millions of dollars, for example, and now you got a couple of thousand.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing here?
What do you mean? What are we doing here? Like, what is the end goal? Or
I mean, like, if you help a company, reach, raise or make profit of millions of dollars, and then you've got a couple of grand, it's like, at what point does, the model, as far as the business model of, Seth's beautiful company, of storytelling, start saying, hey, look, how do we leverage this as, the best possible way? Because, like, what's in it for you? I mean, you're doing things for possibly companies to make them millions of dollars, and the only pay you're getting roughly is like a couple of grand. Is that exciting? Like, what's going on?
Well, I guess let me explain the vision of our company, and then you can um, you know define it how you will. But ultimately, our goal with Storyfy Agency is to reduce the startup failure rate by 10%. So every day I wake up and I go, how the fuck do I do that? Right. And that's where the book came from. It's like, well, I need to get more information in more people's hands. Right. That's one way to do it. I need to go on a podcast and, and share my ideas with people. That's another way to do it. Crazy talk, right? Um, I'm working on a TED talk, right? Like, all those actions are coming from where do I want to be in that future state. But we had to start somewhere, right? With, like, okay, I think this stuff works, I'm not sure if it works, right? So we're basically doing beta testing, right? Go back to existing customers, go through that process, you go, oh shit, this stuff does work, right? Now, then you have to have, you do the beta testing, you're like, we got everything good, now we go to market, right? And that's where we were, what, like a year and a half ago. Like, we basically started going to market when COVID hit. Best timing ever, let me tell you. Totally um, what every company wants to do is start in the middle of a pandemic. But through that process, we, like a lot of people, kind of pivoted. Like, we had to kind of adjust our process. We had to kind of go, okay, what's going to work right now? And, we spent a lot of time over the last year actually just rewriting email campaigns for people, because it was like, well, they're not coming into our store, they're not coming into our restaurant, whatever. How do we communicate with them? We can't go around calling them on the phone. They're not coming to us anymore. So we need to go to them, right? And so we spent over the last year just writing dozens of email campaigns, and we charge hefty prices for that, because we know that we can get a good return. We know that, like, our method produces more often than not like twice the industry standard open rate. We know that like we're seeing things like 4 and 5x what the click-through rate should be, right? Because we know that the story that we're telling is effective and it's resonating with people. So all of that, though, takes time. And then as we continue forward, we just raise our prices because we're like, now we have more data, right? Like that what we're doing is effective. So yeah, so it wasn't. So in the beginning, did we undercharge? Yeah, but we just didn't know, what it was worth, really. I mean, like nobody, like storytelling isn't something you can go to school and get a degree in, right? It is a field that I had to do a ton of self-study. And so I'm in a self-study field and nobody's going, here's what you should charge for storytelling, right? There are, some agencies that do focus on storytelling and some people set prices based on that, but it's specific to their agency, right? And storytellers are or agencies that focus on storytelling are very few in the larger sphere of agencies, branding or marketing, right? We're like we're more of a niche, and then a mainstream thing. So that's why we had to test and figure this shit out, and then go, well, what is the ROI for our customer? Oh, wait, we made them millions of dollars. Okay, then we can charge more. So yeah, so that was so maybe I wasn't answering the question properly before, but that's kind of how we had to work through it. Like it was a lot of trial and error. So
Yeah, totally, Seth. I mean, I totally get that. And that's where I was actually trying to dig in is like, what the fuck? I mean, like, I'm trying to go through that journey with you and trying to get our audience, like, really, like, trying to tell that story of like how, you went through this and make it make sense and resonate with others. It's like, hey, look, I built this company, I originally had this web development company. Then I realized that there was this, component that was missing that was more valuable because I wasn't actually increasing the revenues for these companies before, nothing really changed. But when I actually started telling and focusing on storytelling, that's when I saw a massive, increase, right? Right. The
yeah,
trajectory of the finances beginning to go up, up and up. Right. And
yeah.
then you got to
If,
this point of like, hey, look, now I have this startup. I mean, now I have this thing. I'm getting a couple of clients, and now I have to figure out how to make a business model. So that's kind of where I was. Sorry about that if I interrupted. Yeah.
yeah, no. I could tell you where I want to go in the future.
Yeah.
Which is I want to shit. What's it called? I want to go to performance based, right? Like with these companies. So it's like if I can make you $2, you pay me 50 cents. But if I don't make you anything, you don't pay me anything, right? Like now I've got skin in the game with you, right? I'm not just saying I know what the fuck I'm talking about. You should hire me, right? Like a lot of people do. I'm going, I'll play this game with you because I'm confident that I can give you an ROI. And like I said, the reason I was so dissatisfied in the previous business was I wasn't moving the fucking needle for my clients, and that was really upsetting to me. And you could probably hear it in my voice. It's like upsetting me now just thinking about it. So are we there yet as an agency? No, I wish we were. I wish I could say, oh yeah, I'll take all the risk um, and reward at the same time, but we're not there. We've only been on this journey for a few years, even though the business has been around since 2004. Um, so in the future, though, yeah, I want to go. I want to go that route. I want to be able to say, look, we can do this thing with you. We'll get in the trenches with you, and we know what works, what doesn't work, and we'll help you. And all you have to do is just cut us a check at the end of the day. And if we don't do what we say we're going to do, then we don't get paid. That is ultimately where I want to go with the business, but we're not there today.
Amazing. Amazing. So Seth, thanks for coming on the actual podcast, man. I want to definitely thank you there. Do you want to give us like any amazing links for, the audience out there so they can come check out more of how they can, hack, this whole computer thing and, simulation with the storytelling?
Yeah. So if you go to storyfyagency.com, Storyfy is STORIFY agency.com. You can check out our website, If you search the book, How to Hack Humans, Storytelling for Startups, you'll find the book on Amazon. It's available for pre-order right now. If you're hearing this before the 15th, it'll be available on Kindle, paperback, and hardcover. And anybody who's listening to the show, if you go to storyfyagency.com/kidsintheroom, you can download the first chapter of the book, which covers the neuroscience of storytelling, so you can kind of understand kind of how the brain works. But I mean, essentially, the book is, like I said, a small business can use it, an entrepreneur can use it. It's not just specific to startups. I just use startups because that's our audience. And I give tons of stuff away for free. Like, you can read that book and finish it and walk away and start applying shit. Like, it's not me just talking about a bunch of theory. Like, I'll tell you how to write an email, how to update your content on your website, how to, create an ad, how to write a story. I just give everything away pretty much for free. So
give it away now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, and definitely thank you for coming on the show. But I have one last question too, because you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to grab on a second ago. Here's
sure.
You said that you're trying to get situated to where you're actually going to TEDx. What's slowing you down right now? Like, you're going to a TED show, Yeah.
I'm working on it. I need to, you got to fill out these applications and all this stuff, and then find the right people who, want to hear something on your topic, because they're all themed, right? And so I've just been crazy busy, with our existing clients, then also doing kind of this press junket, if you will, with all the podcasts, like, and just trying to keep everything together, and have enough time to get to doing the TED Talk, knowing what I want to say within that period of time, right? Because I can't just like talk like I do, in a podcast. I need to have specific points, tell my story in a very succinct way. And so it's just putting all that together. And, the podcasts are actually helping me start to
Tell that story.
Pull together how I want to tell the story. So it's kind of a practice run, but these podcasts tend to be a little longer format, and I gotta tighten that shit up.
You gotta tighten the shit up. You gotta do it. Yeah. I gotta let the exhaust come out. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So it's been great having you on the show, man. Definitely want to have you back again, man. I hope you definitely get those TEDx. I'll be looking out for you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it'll probably be sometime next year. So
yeah, well, definitely. Well, hang on for a second. We got to make sure everything uploads, and thank you again.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Kids in the Room podcast.
That's right.
Brought to you by Move Faces TV. Let's go.